Nicole Correri, Sister Nazmina Virjee, Sister Amina Inloes, and Hajj Rajabali. And with your permission, I'd like to omit full biography, but please do refer to the booklets for more information. But I'll ask maybe a one-line when you introduce yourselves, a bit about where you're at and what you're doing would be great. So getting to the topic, a nurtured family. So I think it's important to just keep in mind today that there's no cookie cutter solution, right? So we all might be coming from Muslim families, but I think each family is very different. And each family will require different kinds of techniques and different kinds of solutions depending on the structure. But what we hope to do today kind of is to dialogue a bit on some of the tools and techniques that we can use that might be helpful. It seems like families get in trouble and parents get in trouble when they're parenting from a place of anxiety. So hopefully we can dispel a bit of that anxiety today with the tools and techniques that we're going to offer. But ultimately the goal, inshallah, is to be able to create human beings that are good and that contribute good to the world on their own without their parents telling them to do that. So how can we instill values in our kids where they're making those decisions for themselves? And just to acknowledge my debts today, the questions I'll be asking were inspired by a conversation I had with a friend of mine who's a marriage and family therapist, Sister Nadia Bezzi. I don't have any professional expertise in this, nor any personal experience. I haven't raised kids, but I think a lot of us out there are probably in the same boat. So hopefully you can leave today with a toolkit and have some takeaways to think about as you plan your future. And maybe you're approaching this from the receiving end as a child or as a son or a daughter, and you might be facing some challenges with your parents. So we'd really love to hear from all of you, and we have a mic in the middle. Do we? On the sides. So please line up behind the mics at the end. We'll have some time at the end to take your questions, and we'd like to hear from you. As moderator, I'd like to kindly ask our speakers for permission to do that, namely to just try and keep us on time and on topic so that we have time to hear from all of you at the end. I do have a timer going. I'll ask that speakers keep your responses to 3 minutes. And I have cards here, red and yellow, and they operate kind of like the traffic light, right? So if you see yellow, speed up. That's what I do when I drive before we get red. So just pay attention to that, please. Okay, so I think I'm gonna go ahead and get started with the first question. Sister Nicole, if you don't mind if we start with you. How do you think is the best way to instill moral conscience in a child, where he or she is motivated independently on their own to be good? So what would that look like? What would it look like to instill values in a non-controlling way?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa
I feel like I'm on a game show, and I've got to give you the right answer in 30 seconds or less. So I'm getting a little nervous now. My background is in psychology and education. That's where I come from as an Islamic speaker. My goal is always to connect people to the religion in a meaningful way. So we try to extract the best we can so we can apply it to our lives practically. So I am a homeschooler as a profession. Everybody asks me, what do you do? I said, well, I homeschool my children, I take care of my family, and on occasion I have the opportunity to speak at events such as this. So that's what I do. I'm an educator in every realm. As well as doing all the dirty work of taking care of the family, right? All the specifics to fill up the day. Now, the most important thing to understand when we're talking about moral development of the human being is that moralizing never will produce a moral human being. And by that I mean giving rules and regulations, and as you lay them on top of a human being, will not penetrate the heart of the human being. So what do you do then instead? One, and the most significant aspect, and I'm looking at the crowd and I see many, many young faces, so I see that we're talking about your potential future. I do see some older faces as well. People have families perhaps, children, perhaps even some grandchildren. So the most significant thing that I would say you need to think about in terms of developing the moral character of your child or grandchild, as the case may be, is being a role model worthy of imitation. A role model worthy of imitation. And so that means you have to do your own self-development constantly. I often joke that parenting is the fast track to spiritual development, because in front of you are little sponges and mirrors, and they will reflect your actions, your words, your mannerisms, everything right to you immediately. So you're getting this instant feedback that you wouldn't get in any other circumstance. And that's actually remarkable, because it's really an opportunity for your own spiritual growth. It also makes you very nervous and anxious, because then you also see your failings and shortcomings, and that can be stressful. But take a step back and think about how you can improve perhaps one or two aspects of yourself so that you become that individual who's worthy of imitation. And so that this way, a young child will naturally grow towards that direction that is healthy, moral, upright, ethical, and so forth, as well as providing a nurturing and warm environment. We have this topic today called a nurtured family. And what would you say, what temperature would you say goes with nurturing? Temperature. Want to hear it again? Warm. Yes. So creating a warm family environment, a warm, loving relationship with the members of your family, particularly with your child, is a key to developing that healthy environment for them to grow up in. When I say moralizing won't create a moral human being, the idea there is that by posting information on the wall, for example, a list of do's and don'ts. We have it in the beginning of our brochure here. It tells you what the guidelines are for the conference. How many of you went through that? Reminding people to behave well in this hotel, make sure your children are not running, and so on and so forth. So I'm speeding up now. So the most important thing to keep in mind is that you are the one who sets that guideline, and you are the one who creates that atmosphere.
You still have 20 seconds till you pass the red light. Okay. Hasnain, what would it look like to instill values in a non-controlling way? Yes, if you'd like to elaborate.
As Sister Nicole mentioned, I think the most important thing is being good role models. If you look at the entire prescription of Islam, you'll see fundamentally from a social perspective, the holy prophets and the imams are the guiding light for mankind. Nurun ala nur, yahdillahu li nurihi man yasha. Light upon light, and he guides to the light whoever he wills. And Allah said, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. The holy prophet is your best role model. So that's the prophet to the society. And we have to emulate the same pattern for our families, that the parents are prophetic to the children. And if we do not emulate the holy prophets, particularly the last messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam as our role model,
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
then obviously we're not fulfilling the objectives. Often the biggest mistake we have is when we have children. And I've seen parents, when they have children, they change, they morph into someone else. You know, it's a very interesting metamorphosis, as one would call it, when a child is born to the, before the child is born. Where, I know when my daughter was born, you know, it struck me that I'm a father. And every time she'd run around, it was almost like a reflection of you. And Allah says, here's a chance. Every mistake you made that you wish you didn't, you can teach that in this child. This is a new life. I'm giving you a new start. Every child that comes into our home, it's a new start for us. We always ask Allah, if only we could go back in time and change what we did wrong. Well, Allah says, every child I give you is a new start. what are you going to do with this one? And some of them are spitting images of us, aren't they? So Allah says, look, they look just like you, just a newer version, version 2.0. You go 1.0, that's 2.0, right? But we continue to perpetuate the same mistakes. And they say the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree. It's amazing how we continue to maintain our old ways. And as much as we're regretful, our children typically follow the parents. And what happens, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, your prophet is your role model, you better obey him. وَإِن كُنتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي. Obey him. So imagine when you and I become good role models, and here are the change that I'm talking about, and when I say when we become good role models, our children will naturally gravitate towards us. As they say, the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree. If we fix our own tree, the fruits that we bear will be very good. So in principle here, we as parents many times send mixed messages to our children. I've seen parents drop their kids off at the Islamic Center. It's interesting, you'll see the mom come by the Islamic Center, she'll put on the hijab. As soon as she makes that turn, she throws the hijab off. The child knows that. Or the mom says, okay, go in to learn Quran. The child says, Mom, how about you? He says, no, I'm over the hill. The child says, oh, so it's not that important, because I have to learn it, but you don't. See, that disconnection never leads to positive results. Parents who indulge themselves in the study, and they truly believe in the importance of that subject, children don't need to be convinced about the importance of that subject. They see mom and dad involved in it. When mom and dad are Quranic reciters, when I was in Iran, I met Sayyid Muhammad Sayyid Tabatabai. At the age of 6, when I met him, he was 7, he was Hafiz of Quran. His brother was Hafiz of Quran. His sister was becoming Hafiz of Quran. Okay, how did they become Hafiz of Quran? The mom and dad are constantly reading Quran. So the children are naturally reading Quran. So role modelship is extremely important. We should not have double standards. And we need, when our children are born, we fall in love with them and they become our goals. The mistake is, that's the mistake by the way, they should be a means to our goal. إِنَّمَا أَمْوَالُكُمْ وَأَوْلَادُكُمْ فِتْنَةٌ. Your family and your wealth are a trial on you. They're a means. You and I have to take our children and say, oh Allah, this amana you gave me, how can I bring him or her closer to you?
Thank you, Hajj Hasnain. Sister Nazmina, just to wrap this topic up, what do you think it means to raise children who are principled and not simply just rule followers, right? So I think there's a tendency to kind of just convey what the laws are and put your foot down and be very rule-based, right? What would it mean to raise kids who are principled?
Well, I'm not going to repeat what they've so succinctly said about role modeling, modeling the behavior that ultimately you want to see in your progeny. But one particular thing which I feel works for myself in my own household is from young, to instilling these principles and these moral values for the reward for them to be the value itself. So to draw their attention to the fact, for example, that telling the truth is good because it feels good to tell the truth, not because you're going to get a reward for it or because you're going to be punished if you don't. Sharing, you're encouraged to share because sharing feels good. It feels good, it goes with your fitra, So from young to draw their attention that being good feels good, and that they're drawn to it naturally rather than, having some kind of maslahah, some kind of end to why they should be good. There should never be an explanation as to why you should be good or why you should, refrain from doing something, but because it feels good to you. So I think that's something that I can say from personal experience. And I hope it will lead for my children to be principled, inshallah, they're still young. But from these are things that you have to instill from when they're young. And it's only when they see you, again, modeling that behavior, when they see you kind of, even sometimes you've got to voice those moral dilemmas that you may be in. Like I've got this choice in front of me and I've got this choice. I think I'm going to go with this because this is the, this is the right way to be. And it's only when they see you voice these things and model what you yourself are doing that they learn how to be. And they learn situationally what to do. Obviously, they're not actually computing what you're doing, but you're modeling that behavior. And I guess I have to touch a little bit on modeling the behavior since it's here and it's a hot topic. You see that in the Quran. Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam. I love the fact that he's almost got this, I wouldn't say an obsession, but he's so concerned about his progeny. He's so concerned about his dhurriya. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives him this certificate of imama, he says, Inni ja'aluka linnasi imama. The first thing he says is, وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِي. He's concerned about his dhurriya. And then even when he's going to build the Kaaba, he takes Prophet Ismail along with him. He's there with him doing it. His dua is رَبَّنَا تَقَبَّلْ مِنَّا, from both of us. وَجْعَلْنَا مُسْلِمَيْنِ لَكَ, make us both Muslims. So he includes him in whatever he can do. He brings him along, And there's that sense, even in his wasiyah and Prophet Yaqub, they're so concerned about the faith of their dhurriya. So you see that modeled by the prophets themselves, that their progeny, the faith of their progeny was something extremely important, and they did it by having them along with them in everything that they did. That answers your question.
Thank you very much. Sister Amina, what would you say is kind of the happy medium between thinking too much about what your kids are up to and thinking too little about your kids? So on the one hand, you don't want to be too overbearing, right? Which could be quite suffocating for the child. But then again, no guidance whatsoever is problematic. So how do we strike that balance?
Of course, both scenarios do happen, and both are not ideal for the child. I'm sure we've all seen families where, it's almost as if the child, I don't want to call it the wrong word, but they feel like they're going to have OCD because every detail is controlled, and that doesn't help a person to develop their own independence and to learn how to think and act for themselves. But on the other hand, neglect obviously is very dangerous too, and ideally the family can help young people to basically to learn how to make good decisions, because in the end we'll all be on our own in life with that. Personally, I think the main factor is how important the situation is. That is to say, for example, how dangerous the situation is. There are some things that a child or young person might get into which maybe aren't ideal, but they're not actually a physical danger or an ethical danger. So that's one area that you might give them some leeway, but if something is genuinely threatening to them, either physically threatening to their well-being, or even psychologically, emotionally, religiously, and so forth, then I think those things are very important to look at. One of the things we do have to deal with nowadays is the internet, which is a tremendous blessing. I'm not going to sit here and talk badly about the internet, because we can use it for all sorts of wonderful things. I'm sure many of us found out about this conference online. So it does help all of us, regardless of our age, to keep up with current affairs and learn a lot, keep in touch, etc. But of course, we also know there is another side to this, and internet safety should not be neglected. There are people who will unfortunately prey on young people. And also, the illicit material that's very readily available online, in addition to being haram, of course, it is also shown to be very psychologically and personally destructive. And I saw an article recently saying it's also destructive to one's marriage, even if one is viewing it before marriage. It has a long-term effect on one's life. And so these are perhaps sensitive issues, but they're issues that they're not going to go away if we don't talk about them. And so these sorts of things, it is good to be more cautious about, because it's an issue either of personal safety or of something that's going to have a long-term impact. Another thing that's good is to be willing to take feedback or advice from others in the community who work with your children. teachers, for example, coaches, people in the community, the religious community, doesn't mean that they're necessarily right. They may not be right in what they see about in your children or teenagers, but they may also have another perspective, and it doesn't hurt at least to have the humility and to try to consider it. One thing, and I'm speaking specifically to our community now, that I do think some sections of our community have an issue with. I'm not going to say everyone, but sometimes, and I'm speaking from my experience as a former teacher, there are some families in our community who are reticent to consider the possibility that their child might have a learning disability or a health problem or something that's holding them back in life. And so the idea is, well, no, we're just going to treat them like everyone else and it will go away. But that doesn't do the child any favors. It's just going to make their life harder for them. And these things nowadays, alhamdulillah, particularly in this country, there's a lot of educational methods that can be used to help children who have learning disabilities, for example. Healthcare, of course, is quite good. So these things can be dealt with in a way that's actually going to help the child if it's addressed and dealt with in a professional manner. And so it is for the best interest of children or teenagers or even adults not just to ignore these things, but just to deal with them. This is how we are. Allah makes us all different. And I think it's good to have a little bit more awareness about this, albeit that is veering slightly off topic.
No, this is good, actually. Bringing up internet usage, I think that raises a larger question of what do you think exactly is a good way to, what are trust building practices, basically, that parents can take up with their kids? And so specifically when it comes to monitoring internet, how do you do that in a way where it doesn't kind of undermine building trust with your child?
I think this depends a lot on age. For children, and I mean that literally, people who are not adolescents yet, I would say using technology to filter the internet is a good first step. Now, many children nowadays, I mean preteens, are able to actually circumvent this. I know a family in London, they had some really sophisticated internet filter, and they're telling me how they have this so their teenagers can't access stuff on the internet. And so I went over to their house, and then their son was talking to me, and he said, yeah, and this is what we unplug if we need to use anything on the internet. So, you know, it doesn't always work, but it's a good first step. I personally am not a believer in just allowing every kind of media into the home. I think it is good to restrict television, to restrict internet, to restrict YouTube, because children especially do not have the mental skills necessary to critically analyze these materials. And now if you're sitting with them and talking with them about it, it is a different story. But if they're just getting fed this sort of material, then they're getting fed all sorts of things, and they're not generally old enough to understand what the messages are that they're picking up. Even as adults, I think we should be cautious of what media we expose ourselves to. As for teenagers, or even beyond that age, of course it's a bit more difficult. The reality is most young people who want to do something will do it and keep it secret and are able to do that. So at some point the focus has to shift from control over to dialogue and discussion, and like the other sisters were speaking about, and Brother Hasnain, simply trying to have a good line of communication, and also trying to raise young people who are able to make good ethical decisions, who also internalize this critical thinking process about life. If I can reiterate the point, just simply giving people guidelines is not always enough for them to actually figure out how to implement it. A very common case in point for all ages. Who here has not heard a religious lecture about gossiping? Right? Anyone never heard a lecture about why gossiping is haram? Right. Who here has never heard anyone gossip? You know, sometimes it's even going on during the lecture. So there is a disconnect between hearing do this, do that, and someone actually figuring out how to implement it. And so actually taking the time to have discussions about ethical and moral issues, or ethical dilemmas, situations, contemporary situations, and so forth, can help develop these skills. And I can emphasize that this doesn't necessarily have to be an abstract. I mean, there's all sorts of things that are going on around us in the society today, and taking an active interest in what is going on one can say critically analyzing what is going on. If nothing else, it's a good way to model these things for young people.
Thank you. Speaking about keeping the lines of communication open, Hajj Hasnain, in what ways can we make the voices of children be heard? So how do we make it more of a dialogue and not simply a monologue coming from the parents to the kids?
Well, you know, the basic principles to communicate with our children is to give them the opportunity to express themselves. Often we as parents don't allow our children to speak their minds, or when they do speak their minds, we don't listen to them. And you know, I believe listening is different from hearing. And when we do listen, one way of conformity is to paraphrase what they had just said. And it's a very powerful tool that when a child is mumbling and talking, and he says, oh, so what you meant was this. That conformity, even in a succinct manner, is confirmation that I've heard you and you should keep talking. I'm listening. They've done studies to find that administrators in corporate America, the most effective ones are the ones who are able to paraphrase. You know, even in customer service, if you ever want to win a customer, if you want to win a customer's confidence in you, paraphrase what they just said. Oh, I see. So what you mean is, that conformity is enormous. What it does is it opens channels of communication that the person says, oh, you are paying attention to what I'm saying. So I have to tell you more. If we don't open lines of communication with our children, if we do not befriend them, typically the ones that they trust are their friends. And their friends usually don't give them the right guidance. They have good intentions many a times, but friends are not good guidance. You want to manage the ultimate decision of the child, and the child should know that. But the way we open those channels is from childhood to enable them to be your friends, your sounding board. So many youth that I travel around the world call me and they say, brother, I want to talk to you. And then they'll just spill their hearts out to me. And I'll say to them, you know, I'm your shoulder, tell me whatever you want. Sometimes I'm on the phone for an hour, somebody's telling me all their problems, you know, and I do paraphrase a lot in between it, but I'm wondering, why is this person calling me? Now, many times, of course, they don't have family members, or sometimes their family members are broken. But imagine if you had a mother and father who were your sounding board. It's the safest environment, because now your problems get filtered from the nucleus. It's the safest mechanism possible. So many a times I find parents don't communicate well with their children, particularly men. With due respect, fathers are usually very mechanical in bringing children, thinking that I have this patriarchal, you know, position and I don't talk. Mothers tend to be much more compassionate with their children. They tend to be more chattery with their kids. I think that's just the nature of women, I would say, which is a good thing.
We'll have a debate on that when we do gender dialogue.
No,
because we know that you love to talk, Brother Hasnain.
I'm an exception to the rule. And thank God, imagine if all of us were talking. No, but I'm saying women, like I know I'm very close to my mother, and sometimes 3-4 hours we're just talking. And sometimes I don't want to hear anything, but my mother talks to me, and it just absorbs. Even though there are times when I feel very spiritually low, but I can't tell my mother I'm spiritually low. It's, you know, it's insulting. But she will tell me, she'll advise me, she'll mention a hadith, or she'll recite an ayah, and it just strikes me like, oh, what's wrong with me? I won't say anything to my mother. I'll go back to my room and I'll feel like, wow, you just suddenly got this jolt of energy for deen, you know? It's fantastic. So open up channels of communication. Fathers typically don't talk well with their children, especially their sons. Daughters, they tend to be very friendly. Sons, father to sons, a major problem. Take a lesson in Quran. Luqman is talking to his son, Ya bunayya, you know, La tushrik billah, Ya bunayya, aqim as-salah, wa'amur bil ma'ruf, wanha 'anil munkar. What a beautiful set of advices that Luqman gives to his son. It's a template of how fathers should be talking to their sons. When you do that, you eliminate majority of the problems in the child. Children develop their confidence through that communication. When fathers pay attention to them, 90% of their confidence is tackled. Children who suffer from inferiority complex, if you study them, you'll find usually their fathers haven't played a strong role in the family. And they've done studies where fathers, if they don't play a strong communication role with their children, they will weaken the family structure. Extremely important. I can talk a lot about that, but I think let's just continue with the dialogue.
Sure, thank you. I'd also like to encourage the speakers to jump in. Feel free to talk to each other. If there's a question that I don't ask you to address and you want to add something, please do feel free to do that.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
This issue of communication, and particularly fathers to sons, mothers to daughters, is so critical. And we see when someone's retired, especially gentlemen who are now grandfathers, you'll hear them when they look at their grandchildren, I wish I had spent more time with my child. That's the wrong time to, reevaluate your parenting. Evaluate it from the beginning. This is very important. And I think if we look at the Hadith Kisa as a model for family connectedness, we have an image there that we should apply in our own lives. What do we see in this Hadith Kisa that we read every time we begin a gathering? And it's read sometimes really rapidly just to get through it. But what do you see? You see an image of a family together, everyone included. Who comes there? Prophet's there. Who comes under the cloak? Fatima comes under the cloak, alayhi salam. Imam Ali, Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein. Isn't that beautiful? It's an image of a family together under one blanket or cloak. It's amazing. And here you're seeing that all of them are together. So that also gives you an image of proximity, meaning being near one another is what a family should be doing. And look at our lifestyle today where houses are getting larger and larger and everyone has their own room and everybody can close their door and everybody can be separate and everybody can plug into their multiple devices. They can watch, now all the cable companies promote these televisions where you can watch multiple channels at the same time and everybody can watch their own thing and record their own show for later and so on. So more and more our society is showing us ways in which we can separate from one another. So my biggest advice would be think about how you can pray together more. Jama'ah Salah as a family, always. Priority. And that's something I do with my children because as I homeschool, I have the opportunity to do Salatul Dhuhr and Asr and obviously Maghrib Isha, most people do, but I do all of the salahs with them. And I make sure that we're doing it together. So this is like a priority. And always you hear the advice in parenting magazines, on parenting shows that families should eat together, right? You should share a meal together. And this is where those opportunities for dialogue can happen because it's casual, it's more relaxed, nobody's on the spot, right? And so then you can talk. Another technique for talking and being together is driving, particularly with teenagers, because they're captive audience. Now they're next to you, you're driving. This is a great place to dialogue. In fact, I really look forward to the times I drive my daughters to different places. If they have an activity or a program, I love having them in the car independently. And then we really can talk and we can really get to know things. And then they sometimes say the most brilliant things. And you think, alhamdulillah, it's so amazing to see how their minds are working, how they're excited about life. And talking about that little element right there, being excited about life, is the also key and critical thing that young people need in this alienating world we live in. The most important thing you want to provide your children is that interest and excitement in life. We don't need to indoctrinate our children on all kinds of Sharia because then we're not using the prophetic model. What is the prophetic model? Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajah.
Sisters. There we go. This model begins by instilling the love of something greater than all of us. That there is this oneness, this God that is looking out for all creation, that is looking out for all humanity, that is guiding and directing us, and that ultimately we return to, that will judge things and take care of us and set everything straight, right? And put us at ease. So this whole image of connecting with something greater than you is absolutely vital to the well-being of the human being. spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally, to know that there is something greater than you, and to connect yourself with that, and to lose yourself in a way in that greater existence.
You know, speaking about eating, you say when we get together, we should eat together. Charlie Rose was interviewing Larijani. As you know, Larijani is the Speaker of the Parliament of the Islamic Republic. And he asked him, he says, you, your brother, your family, almost all of you are in politics. How did you all get there? How come you're all in such high positions? He said, we always ate together, and our father always spoke on the table with us and gave each one of us time to express what we felt, and we spoke politics. It became the norm of our lives. So imagine if Allah is in that conversation, right? Your spirituality is in there, the business is in there, the politics is in there. What do you think your children will be like?
You set the tone, essentially.
Yeah, you set the tone, and I think it's important that it's not just the parents speaking, but that we evoke answers from the children themselves. I think one of the techniques is paraphrasing, and another one is the technique of questioning. Not questioning as in interrogating or grilling, nothing like that, but to actually ask their opinion. And they come out with such surprising things sometimes. An opinion on what I should do, for example. What do you think I should do in this situation? And again, I keep going back to the example of Prophet Ibrahim. He does the same thing. He has a dream. He knows what he's supposed to do. He says, "Inni adbahuka fil manam, fanzur madha tara." What do you think about it, my son? He knows what he's supposed to do, but yet, so he actually asks, what do you think? And I think that's a really powerful technique with children, because they feel valued, number one, that you're asking them their opinion, that there's somebody listening to what they have to say. You're not just talking at them all the time, or telling them what to do, or expressing how you know about everything and your way is good and, preaching, but you're actually interested to hear on their views of the world, their opinion on things, the way they might do things differently, So I think that's something also very, very powerful and conducive to dialogue, where you use that tool and technique of questioning.
Just a quick point about questioning. Just recently at Wise, one of the boys had an altercation with another boy, because one was annoying the other. And this really, really works. And I think this is the problem many of us, in our fad society where Hollywood and Bollywood feeds us this fad, and we're sort of in paralysis, receiving the crumbs from these masters who are creating imaginations for us. We're designed not to ask questions. We are in a very passive mode. We're supposed to receive instructions, and we become what we call matrix. And what I find is the Quran is filled with questions. أَفَلَا يُؤْمِنُونَ, أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِأَحْكَمِ الْحَاكِمِينَ. I always wonder, why is Allah asking me the question when He's talking to me? As the sister is mentioning, the power of questioning. So when this boy got into an altercation with this other boy, I asked him, I said, so what did you do? He said, well, I just jumped on him and I was going to punch him. I said, well, is that the right thing to do? And I'm asking questions. He says, well, no. I said, well, what should you have done? He says, well, he annoyed me. I said, I know. Well, what do you think you should have done? He says, well, I don't know. In the state of annoyance, I don't know. I said, well, how about if you looked at him and said, hey, why are you annoying me? Huh? I said, why don't you ask him why he's annoying you? Maybe he'll tell you. He says, he won't answer me. I said, it's irrelevant what he answers you. The point is, you've engaged the individual to think. Most of us have gone astray because we don't ask why. Simple. Why am I here? What am I doing here? When I come on this pulpit and speak on these tables, I'm asking, why am I here? Am I here to entertain you? Am I here to impress you? Am I here to fulfill an objective? When we ask such questions, we become more focal and focused to fulfill the objectives. So ask each other, why? Even when someone's getting angry, excuse me, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Huh? Yeah, that's all. Walk away. He doesn't have to answer you. Oh, he asked me why. I wonder. I said, if you go and ask him, and the boy came and says, the reason I bother him? I asked him, why'd you bother him? He says, I want his attention, I like him. I want him to be my friend. I says, you're doing it the wrong way.
Just to add a point point, which is really important. When you're looking at the developmental appropriateness of when you begin to question and ask and elicit opinions from young people, there's actually a good time to do that, and there's a premature time to do that. And when we look at how children develop, what they need very much in the early years of life is that, what we call in the system that I teach in, called Waldorf education, loving authority. Some of you might have heard me speak about this before. Loving authority means, again, back to that idea of being a worthy role model, that you have that confidence, that you have that image of what it is to be a human being, and the child looks up to you, right? When you ask too many questions of a young child who has not yet developed what Sister Amina was referring to before, that critical thinking skills, you're actually stressing them. Because you're inadvertently, right, telling them that you don't know. And that makes them anxious. So I've told this story before, but I think it's worthy of, because it gives you a good picture of why this is important. For the young child, and I'm speaking up to the age of 7, if you begin to ask them, what would you like to do? Where would you like to go? What would you like to eat? You get them very anxious, because guess what, Mom and Dad? You're supposed to know that.
How did you come up with the age of 7?
These are 7-year cycles of human development that Steiner talks about, but it also reflects the hadith of the Holy Prophet, where he breaks down childhood in 7-year cycles.
But Steiner came up with the hadith?
Yeah,
I mean,
Steiner uses that model. He didn't come up with the hadith.
I'm saying, was he privy to the hadith?
No, I don't think so.
So it would be interesting to find out, I mean,
Where
what
did he
research
develop?
has shown that 7, because, you know, it's conforming in the sense historically.
Biologically, too.
Yeah.
There's a certain brain development that happens at age 7, and then 14 as well. But at 14 and 15, the brain convolutes a second time, and there's more critical thinking skills. So those are part of those cycles. And those cycles continue throughout life, which is fascinating. So whenever I meet people who are going through trouble, they'll talk to me about what's going on. I'll say, how old are you? And inevitably, they're on that 7-year cycle, at that cusp, 35, 42, and so forth. There's usually critical changes in the development of a human being. So in this picture of the story, I want to tell you, the little child was at the cash register. How many of you have been at the cash register? What do they always put out there? Lots of tempting things, yes? The child sees all these cookies. The mom starts telling the child, which one do you like? Would you like this one? There are about 6 different flavors. How about the oatmeal raisin? Do you want chocolate chip? Maybe, we'll get this, sugar cookie. And on and on, the mom's going. And then she starts saying, maybe we should get this one for your friend. She would like this. And she's going on and on. About 2-3 minutes into this, the young child busts out into tears. She was about 6 years old. She's like, I don't know, you pick it, Mom. So this is just an image of what takes place when the young child is burdened too early with too many choices. You're not going to inhibit their self-esteem or their development by giving that firm boundary and grounding. That doesn't mean you're authoritarian, where you insist on everything harshly, no, but at the same time, you're not permissive. It has to be the middle way, just like our religion talks about the middle way. They want to have that balance. But that security that you give them by creating healthy boundaries, clear expectations, and not by talking too much necessarily either, because a young child can't handle all that verbosity. That's really healthy. And as they grow, you begin to engage them, as we've discussed here, and then you take, especially in the teenage years, that opinion, just like that's beautiful that you're pointing out Ibrahim alayhi salam, having this dialogue, reminding us that that's what Allah says should take place. It's beautiful.
It's just unbelievable.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and another good point to keep in mind is that it takes a long time for most human beings to really understand, for us to understand why we do what we do. And especially children don't usually have this capacity unless they're very abnormally introspective, or unusually, not abnormally, unusually. Teenagers, probably not, even in our 20s, sometimes it's not there, inshallah it develops. But a lot of times this comes up when we're dealing with negative behaviors, because if it's positive behaviors, we don't really care. So for example, if they love math and they do math problems all day, we don't ask why. But if they're not doing their homework, or maybe they're dressing in a way that we don't like, maybe they're wearing something, or they want something that we might feel is too expensive, or why do you want that? Whatever it is that they're doing, a lot of times there's this tendency just to treat the behavior, or to punish for the behavior. So just punish for the grades, or punish for the homework, without actually getting to the root causes. And like Hasnain was saying, sometimes the root causes are very different from what we could imagine. That young person obviously has not yet learned the skill of making friends. This is a skill. It's not something children are born with. They're going to try different ways to figure out how to make friends. It's a modeled skill that one child can learn from one's family or school and so forth. But the point is, as we are growing up, we don't have all of these things sorted out. So it could be something like that, or even with homework. I mean, it could be something as simple as the child doesn't know how to study, or they don't know how to organize their notes, or write reminders to bring things to school. I mean, they maybe need support with that. It may be an emotional issue, for example, that's pushing them just to be in denial and watch TV all day, or it may be peer pressure, why they want this or that. Or there may be serious things going on. But the point being that one of the things we can do once we reach a certain stage in life is try to get a bit more into the why. And that can come through dialogue. I mean, sometimes even very young people are very astute, but sometimes it takes a bit of digging. Especially when we're dealing with very young children, I think also there's a tendency sometimes we look at them as mini adults. And while I firmly believe in that we should, in many ways, treat our young people in an adult manner. That is to say, we should always be pushing them to aspire to adulthood instead of keeping them young, which I think sometimes does happen in our community. On the other hand, we have to remember that developmentally they are not adults. So if a 5-year-old, for example, steals your credit card, an adult reaction is to get mad and what's he going to do with this or she going to do with it? We have to remember, it's a 5-year-old. They don't have any concept of this sort of thing. So wait a minute, what is going on? What has prompted this behavior? Are they trying to imitate an adult, or do they know it's important to you and they want to annoy you, or they're not having enough attention? Yeah, and attention is a good thing to conclude on. And this is actually another thing that one picks up when working in a classroom, but I often say everything I needed to know I learned in high school. And that is we all need attention, whether we're adults, whether we're teenagers or children. And one of the best pieces of advice I received as a teacher was when you have a child in the class who's misbehaving because they want attention, just give them attention. Now, don't necessarily give them attention to reward them for the behavior, but make sure they're getting the attention that they need, and then all of the undesirable behaviors will subsist. So you're meeting the actual need instead of dealing with the symptom.
So you're saying that we tend to focus on the negative characters. So if a child does something wrong in school, we tend to say, okay, why are you failing this class? But we ignore the good class. So you would suggest that we should recognize the good work to sort of counterbalance?
Well, that's a very important point. Yes, it is proven. I would say it's been proven psychologically that positive reinforcement is much more effective with people. And again, it's not age limited. It works with employees, it works with children, it works with spouses. Positive reinforcement leads to lasting change in people, and it brings us up, giving people to aspire to something, but it's more difficult. It takes more thought. It's much easier to punish. I was talking about this with someone the other day, but because he's not here, I can talk about this. I had a very difficult boss once. So this is an adult situation, but the same principle applies. So me and my coworkers are trying to think about what can we do to deal with this situation, because it was really making our lives very difficult. It was very negative, always criticizing people, getting very upset. So we decided we were going to have a secret plan to be very, very positive and to say lots of nice things about him behind his back. So we didn't actually say it to him, but we started praising him all the time to other people. And somehow either he heard about it or it created some vibe. And I mean, although this is someone who's significantly older than myself, but still, we're like this at any age. He saw an example that he wanted to aspire to. He wanted to be this efficient, nice, compassionate, kind person. And he really changed. And the whole environment of things changed. And of course, that's an example in the workplace, but it's the same whether dealing with young children or adults. We don't want to be bad. We don't want people to tell us we're bad. We want to be good. The human being has a desire for perfection. So the higher we can give people good standards to fulfill, the more likely they are to fulfill them. Thank you for bringing up that very important point.
I'd like to go ahead and open the floor up to the audience for questions. And just a gentle reminder,